He was stopped at the gates of the complex, publicly shamed, and told there was no place for people like him, all because of the red MAGA hat he wore with pride. But when he revealed who he really was, his accuser's world turned upside down. It was early on a Saturday morning, and the gentle rays of sunlight illuminated the fresh facades of a newly built residential complex. Robert Freeman, a tall man in his 50s, with distinguished streaks of gray in his hair, parked his pickup truck in front of the property management office. On his head was his signature red cap emblazoned with MAGA, a piece of attire that often evoked strong reactions from others lately. Robert was in no rush. His morning was planned: stop by, review some paperwork, and perhaps enjoy a coffee at the local cafe. A calm and diplomatic man, he was used to resolving problems with a steady hand. But this morning held surprises. From the opposite side of the lot, a loud honk broke the tranquility. A speeding SUV nearly grazed the lawn before jerking to a stop. Behind the wheel was Josh Rivers, a young, energetic, and slightly hot-headed resident of the complex. Josh's eyes immediately locked onto the red cap, and his face transformed into that of a righteous avenger. With an aggressive maneuver, he parked diagonally across the driveway, intentionally blocking Robert's truck. Josh jumped out of his car, slamming the door for emphasis, and declared loudly, "Hey, buddy, this is a neighborhood for decent people. You've got the wrong address wearing that hat." Robert calmly turned off his engine, took his time stepping out of the truck, and stood tall. His composed demeanor and stature exuded confidence, instantly setting the tone of the confrontation. "Good morning, young man," Robert said, tilting his head slightly as if trying to understand the situation. "It seems you're having some parking issues." "Good morning?" Josh practically sputtered in outrage. "Good morning, in a country that's falling apart because of people like you? You don't belong here. We don't tolerate symbols of hate in this neighborhood." Robert's eyes briefly scanned the parking lot, where passers-by were already pausing to watch the commotion. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others whispered among themselves with smirks. "Symbols of hate? Oh, you mean the hat," Robert replied with a faint smile. "Amusing, but I'm afraid I'm not here to debate fashion trends." His confidence only fueled Josh's fury. Throwing his arms in the air, Josh gestured dramatically toward the hat. "Seriously? Do you think that red rag means nothing? It's an insult to all of us. Don't you realize it demeans everyone around you?" Leaning casually against his truck, Robert watched as Josh worked himself into a frenzy. His calmness only seemed to irritate the younger man more. "I just parked here, mister. What's your name?" "Josh Rivers," the young man barked, stepping closer. "And I don't care who you are. If you think you can walk around here with that hat, you've got the wrong idea." The growing crowd began to stir. Some sided with Josh, nodding along and murmuring in agreement. Others shook their heads at the scene, wondering why such a fuss was being made. "Josh," Robert said, raising his hands in a placating gesture, "it seems like this is shaping up to be your most stressful morning in a while. Perhaps we can have a calm conversation." But Josh wasn't about to back down. Pointing aggressively at the hat, he shouted, "If you think you can strut around here, you've got the wrong place and the wrong time." From the crowd, a neighbor chimed in, "Josh, maybe it's time to cool it. It's just a hat." "Just a hat?" Josh turned to the group with incredulity. "It's the symbol of everything we fight against." Meanwhile, Robert calmly pulled out his phone and began dialing. His relaxed movements drew the attention of the crowd, which now switched between watching him and Josh as the tension became almost tangible. "Are you recording something?" Josh demanded, narrowing his eyes at Robert. "I'm just making a call," Robert replied evenly, tapping the screen. I think this might clarify a few things. Nearby, a few kids playing in the park began giggling, pointing at the guy in the red hat who's trolling the angry man. What had started as a simple parking lot confrontation was clearly becoming something far more dramatic. Neither Josh nor Robert could have predicted just how serious things would become. Josh Rivers had fully embraced his self-assigned role as the hero of the moment. His voice grew louder with each passing second, and his wild gesturing alternated between Robert and the gathering crowd. "Do you all understand what people like him have done to this country?" Josh bellowed, sweeping his gaze across the onlookers. "What is he even doing here in our neighborhood? This place was built for families, for real values, and he shows up wearing that hat." Still leaning casually against his truck, Robert crossed his arms and maintained his composure. His calmness only stoked Josh's anger. "Have I offended you personally?" Robert asked with a slight smile. "Or does the hat make you rethink your existence?" This remark elicited a smattering of chuckles from the crowd, further irritating Josh. "This isn't funny. This is about principles. People like him have no place here." The crowd began to split into two groups. One side openly laughed and filmed the scene, treating it as entertainment. The other side, more serious, glared at Robert, silently backing Josh's fiery tirade. Josh, feeling the need to escalate, pulled out his phone. "I'm calling the police. Let's see how they deal with this." "By all means," Robert said with a shrug. "It'll be interesting to see how quickly our emergency services respond." His dry remark drew another wave of laughter. Minutes later, a police car pulled into the parking lot. Two officers stepped out, scanning the crowd. Josh immediately ran up to them, waving his arms. "There he is," Josh exclaimed, pointing at Robert. "This man is threatening our community. He's here with that symbol of hate." The senior officer approached Robert, studying him carefully. "Sir, can you explain what's going on here?" "Good morning, officer," Robert began, removing his hat and nodding respectfully. "I parked here to meet with the property management company. Mr. Rivers seems upset about my choice of headwear. That's all there is to it." The officer turned to Josh. "You said he made threats?" "Yes," Josh insisted. "His presence is a threat." The officer raised an eyebrow and glanced at Robert's hat. "Symbols aren't crimes, sir. Are you sure you want to file an official complaint?" Josh faltered, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control. Robert smiled and addressed the officer. "Feel free to stay, officer. This morning seems to be getting more interesting for everyone." The crowd burst into laughter, and one neighbor even clapped. The officer shook his head. "If there's no actual threat, we'll have to dismiss this call." As Josh fumed silently, a nearby neighbor whispered loudly, "Maybe now would be a good time to apologize." Josh stormed off, leaving Robert standing tall as the unofficial hero of the day. The crowd on the street buzzed with murmurs as Robert raised his hand to catch their attention. "Mr. Rivers," he said, tilting his head slightly, "why don't we take a different approach? Perhaps we can step into the property management office. I think there's something inside that might interest you." Josh crossed his arms over his chest, his smirk growing wider. "Oh, sure, this should be good. I'm positive they'll confirm you don't belong here. Lead the way. You're just going to make yourself look like an even bigger fool." Unfazed by the provocation, Robert nodded and started toward the office. The entire crowd, like a curious flock of sheep, followed him. Phones were out, ensuring not a second of this unfolding drama would go undocumented. Inside the office, the property manager, a slender woman in a smart business suit, was seated at the reception desk, scanning through paperwork. Her head lifted as the group entered, and her expression changed immediately. "Mr. Freeman," she exclaimed, her voice warm and welcoming. "What a pleasant surprise to see you. We were just finalizing updates on your project. Everything is ready for your signature." Josh froze in his tracks. His smug expression crumbled into one of confusion, then disbelief. The crowd, sensing a shift in the atmosphere, went silent in anticipation. "Your project?" Josh asked, his voice faltering. His eyes darted between the manager and Robert, searching for some explanation. Robert, taking his time, opened his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents. With deliberate care, he placed it on the counter, tapping his fingers lightly on the cover. "Yes, Mr. Rivers," Robert said, his tone calm but firm. "This is my project, the very complex you live in, including that park where I assume you jog in the mornings. Now tell me, do you still think I don't belong here?" A ripple of astonished whispers spread through the crowd. Josh's face turned bright red, as though he wished the ground would swallow him whole. "Wait, so you're the architect?" Josh stammered, grasping at straws. "Not just the architect," Robert clarified, standing tall. "I'm also a co-owner of the entire property. I've invested years of my life designing this complex to make it a comfortable and beautiful place for people like you, Josh." The crowd's whispers turned into a mix of chuckles, murmurs, and exclamations. Someone took off their hat in a show of respect, while another muttered, "This just keeps getting better." Josh, humiliated and speechless, struggled to form words. His lips moved, but no sound came out. With a satisfied smile, Robert turned back to the property manager. "Sorry for the interruption. I just wanted to make sure the truth prevailed. Would you mind reminding Mr. Rivers of my standing here?" The manager, maintaining her professional demeanor, turned to Josh and said politely, "Yes, Mr. Rivers. Mr. Freeman is not only the architect, but also one of the primary investors. Your privilege to live here is thanks to his work." Josh, now visibly deflated, mumbled, I didn't know. I'm sorry." Robert turned to the crowd, his expression kind but triumphant. "This is a valuable lesson for all of us. Perhaps we should take the time to truly understand people before making assumptions about them." The crowd responded with a wave of approving murmurs. Josh slinked out of the office, avoiding eye contact with anyone, while Robert stood at the center of the group, now the clear victor. One neighbor called out, "Mr. Freeman, thanks for making this neighborhood such an amazing place." Robert's smile grew wider. "Always happy to help. Let's just make sure we treat each other with respect, okay?" The scene ended with applause from the crowd as the manager offered Robert a cup of coffee to take the edge off his morning show. The crowd outside the property management office was as tense as an audience at the premiere of a suspenseful movie. Josh, standing at the center of the attention, looked like he wanted to disappear. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck in his throat. I didn't know. I'm sorry. He stammered, his voice trembling as his eyes darted nervously around the gathered faces. Robert, in stark contrast, was the picture of calm. He raised his hand again to address the group. "Dear neighbors," he began, his voice steady and confident. "This hat is nothing more than a symbol of my beliefs, but I'm not here to force those beliefs on anyone. I'm here to improve your homes, your comfort, and your future. I'd like to believe that moving forward, we'll judge each other by our actions, not by our clothing." The words carried weight, cutting through the tension like a knife. The crowd erupted into applause and approving murmurs. Someone shouted, "He's right, Josh. Stop taking it out on people." Josh, shoulders hunched, retreated to the edge of the crowd, avoiding eye contact. Meanwhile, others began pulling out their phones, capturing the moment. Social media would soon transform this event into the internet's newest sensation. By the following day, the incident had gone viral. Headlines across platforms read, "MAGA hat guy turns out to be the complex's architect. Don't judge a hat until you know who wears it." Josh became a meme, his embarrassed face paired with captions like, "When you pick the wrong battle, and the hat guy owns the building." Robert, on the other hand, became a symbol of grace under pressure. His confident demeanor and calm handling of the situation inspired admiration. During an interview with the local paper, a reporter asked him, "How did you manage to stay so calm in the face of such hostility?" "Staying calm keeps your mind clear," Robert replied with a kind smile. "Honestly, I was more worried about my coffee getting cold." The response elicited laughter, solidifying his status as a local hero. A few weeks later, Robert was spotted at a construction site for a new project, this time wearing a different hat that read, "Building Together." A construction worker recognized him and chuckled. "Nice hat, Mr. Freeman. New slogan?" Robert winked. "Yup, less likely to attract police attention." The crew burst into laughter as the camera panned out to show Robert surveying the site. The scene ended with Robert watching the sunset over the buildings he had designed, a peaceful smile on his face. It wasn't just the conclusion of a confrontation, it was the beginning of a new chapter, where respect and understanding became the neighborhood's guiding values.